The scorching Montana sun beat down on Rebecca Jane's trembling hands as she stood before the makeshift altar. Her wedding dress, borrowed from a woman twice her size, hanging limply around her frame. At 20 years old, she never imagined her wedding day would be a public spectacle orchestrated by her stepfather to pay his gambling debts. "Do you, Rebecca Jane, take Albert Holloway to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The minister asked, his voice carrying across the dusty town square where nearly all of Copper Creek's 300 residents had gathered to witness her humiliation in the summer of 1878. Rebecca's throat constricted. Albert Holloway was 53, a ruthless businessman who had loaned her stepfather money and now demanded repayment in the form of a young bride. His eyes raked over her with undisguised hunger. She began, but the words stuck in her throat. "She can't marry him," a deep voice called out, silencing the crowd, "because she's already married to me." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a tall cowboy strode forward, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust clung to his worn leather chaps and a revolver hung at his hip. His shoulders were broad beneath a faded blue shirt, and his confident gait suggested a man who feared nothing and no one. "What nonsense is this?" Albert sputtered, his face reddening with rage. The cowboy reached Rebecca's side in 4 long strides and removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair and eyes the color of summer sky. "Name's Preston O'Malley, and this woman is my wife." Rebecca stared at him, utterly bewildered. She had never seen this man before in her life. "That's preposterous," her stepfather shouted. "The girl's never been married. We were wed 6 months ago when I passed through," Preston said with such conviction that Rebecca almost believed him herself. "Ask her." All eyes turned to Rebecca. In that moment, she saw her choices with perfect clarity. Marry Albert Holloway and endure a life of servitude to a man who viewed her as property, or trust this mysterious stranger who offered her an escape. "It's true," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Preston is my husband." Albert lunged forward, grabbing Rebecca's arm. "You lying little!" Preston's hand clamped down on Albert's wrist with such force that the older man winced. "Take your hands off my wife," he said quietly, but with an edge that made Albert step back. "I paid good money for this arrangement," Albert protested, looking to Rebecca's stepfather for support. "And I'll reimburse every cent," Preston said. "But Rebecca comes with me." The minister looked between them, confused. If they're already married, they aren't. Rebecca's stepfather shouted. "She's lying." Preston reached into his pocket and produced a folded document, our marriage certificate, filed in Helena last winter. Rebecca held her breath as the minister examined the paper. It looked official, with stamps and signatures she couldn't make out from where she stood. "It appears to be in order," the minister said reluctantly. Preston turned to Rebecca, his eyes conveying a silent message, "Play along." "We should be going, darling. Our ranch won't run itself." Without waiting for further argument, he took her hand and led her through the crowd. Rebecca was acutely aware of the whispers and stares, but she kept her chin high, matching Preston's confident stride. "My things," she whispered. "We'll get them," he promised, helping her onto a magnificent chestnut horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away from the town square, Rebecca's heart pounded against her ribs. She had just placed her fate in the hands of a complete stranger. "Why did you do that?" she asked when they were out of earshot. "Couldn't stand to see you forced to marry that old vulture," Preston replied, his breath warm against her ear. "No woman deserves that fate." "But the marriage certificate, forged," he admitted. "I have a friend who's good with documents. I always carry a few blank ones for emergencies." Rebecca twisted to look at him. "You're an outlaw." Preston's laugh was rich and genuine. "Not exactly, just a man who believes in being prepared." His expression grew serious. "I'll take you somewhere safe, and then you can decide what you want to do. You don't owe me anything." As they rode toward the setting sun, Rebecca realized she was smiling for the first time in months. Whether Preston O'Malley was her savior or her downfall remained to be seen. But at least now she had a choice. They rode for hours, the landscape changing from the rolling hills near Copper Creek to thicker forests as they climbed in elevation. Rebecca's borrowed wedding dress caught on the saddle horn and she struggled to keep it from tearing further. "We'll stop soon," Preston promised, noticing her discomfort. "There's a cabin about an hour's ride from here where we can rest for the night." "Whose cabin?" "A friend's. He's away trapping in Canada until fall." Rebecca nodded, too exhausted to question further. The events of the day had left her drained, and she found herself leaning back against Preston's solid chest, drawing comfort from his steady presence. True to his word, they reached a small cabin nestled among towering pines just as dusk was settling. Preston helped her dismount, his hands strong yet gentle on her waist. Her legs wobbled after the long ride. "Easy," he said, steadying her. "Been a while since you've been on horseback." "I've never been on a horse before today," she admitted. Surprise flickered across his face. "You did well for a first-timer." The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed against one wall. Preston lit a lantern and quickly built a fire to ward off the evening chill. "I'll sleep outside," he said, gesturing to the bed. "You take that." Rebecca tugged at her wedding dress, feeling ridiculous in the oversized garment. "I have nothing else to wear." Preston rummaged through a trunk and produced a man's shirt and a pair of trousers. "These might be big, but they'll be more comfortable than that dress." He stepped outside to tend to his horse while Rebecca changed, grateful to be free of the cumbersome dress. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs of the borrowed clothes, cinching the waist with a piece of rope she found. When Preston returned, he carried saddlebags and a rifle. He paused in the doorway, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in men's clothing. A smile tugged at his lips. "What's funny?" she asked defensively. "Nothing," he said, setting down his gear. "Just thinking you look more yourself now." "You don't know who I am," she pointed out. "True enough." He pulled food from his saddlebags: jerky, hardtack, and a tin of coffee. "But I know you're not the type to submit quietly to being sold off in marriage." Rebecca accepted the jerky he offered. "I almost did. But you didn't." Preston poured water from his canteen into a pot and set it on the fire to boil for coffee. "You chose freedom when it presented itself." They ate in companionable silence, and Rebecca found herself studying her rescuer. In the flickering firelight, she could see that he was younger than she initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27. His face was tanned from the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled often. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness to him that put her at ease. "Why were you in Copper Creek today?" she finally asked. Preston sipped his coffee before answering. "I was passing through on my way north. Stopped for supplies and overheard talk in the saloon about a wedding that wasn't exactly voluntary." He shrugged. "Thought I'd take a look. And you decided to claim a strange woman as your wife, just like that. I've done stranger things." His eyes met hers across the fire. "Besides, you looked like you needed saving." Rebecca bristled at that. "I don't need a man to save me." Preston's laugh surprised her. "Clearly, but even the strongest person sometimes needs an ally." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What's your story, Rebecca Jane? How did you end up at that altar?" She hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing her troubles. But something about Preston's direct gaze encouraged honesty. "My father died of consumption 3 years ago," she began. "My mother remarried too quickly. Walter seemed decent enough at first, but after my mother died last winter, he showed his true nature." She stared into the fire, the memories painful. "He drinks, gambles, and when he loses, he finds new ways to pay his debts. And you were his latest payment," Preston said quietly. Rebecca nodded. "Albert Holloway has wanted me since I turned 18. He offered to forgive Walter's debts in exchange for my hand." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I refused, but Walter told me I had no choice, that I owed him for taking care of me after my mother died." "You owed him nothing," Preston said, his voice hard with anger. "I know that now." She looked up at him. "What about you? Do you make a habit of rescuing unwilling brides?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, but I know what it's like to be treated as property rather than a person." Rebecca sensed there was more to that statement, but Preston stood abruptly, ending the conversation. "You should get some rest," he said. "We have a long ride tomorrow." "Where are we going?" "There's a town called Silver Creek about 3 days' ride from here. I know people there who can help you get settled, find work, a place to stay." And then what? Preston rolled out a bedroll near the door. Then you live your life however you choose. That's what freedom means. As Rebecca lay in the unfamiliar bed that night, listening to Preston's steady breathing across the room, she wondered what form that freedom might take. For so long, her life had been defined by others' expectations and demands. Now the future stretched before her, uncertain but full of possibility. Dawn broke crisp and clear, sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Rebecca woke to find Preston already up, cooking something that smelled surprisingly good over the fire. "Hope you like flapjacks," he said, sliding two onto a tin plate for her. "Found some flour and dried berries in the cupboard." Rebecca couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her. "Thank you." They ate quickly, and Rebecca helped clean up while Preston packed their few belongings. "We should reach the Miller homestead by nightfall," he explained as they prepared to leave. "Their good people won't ask too many questions." Outside, Preston's horse nickered a greeting. Rebecca approached the animal cautiously, running a hand along its smooth neck. "What's his name?" she asked. "Ranger." Preston adjusted the saddle. "He's been with me for 6 years. He's beautiful." Preston smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "He knows it too, vainest horse in the territory." As Preston helped her mount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, Rebecca felt a curious flutter in her chest. She dismissed it as nerves about the journey ahead. They rode through the day, stopping occasionally to rest Ranger and stretch their legs. Preston proved to be a surprisingly good companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. He had an easy way about him, a natural charm that drew her in despite her determination to remain guarded. "How did you learn to forge documents?" she asked during one of their breaks, curiosity getting the better of her. Preston handed her his canteen before answering. "Spent some time with a man who believed official papers should be accessible to everyone, not just those in power." "A criminal, you mean?" "A believer in equality," Preston countered. "Not all laws are just Rebecca. Call me Becky," she said suddenly. "My friends used to call me that before." She trailed off, thinking of the life she'd left behind. Preston's eyes softened. "Becky it is then." By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. "We need to push harder," Preston said, glancing at the sky. "Storms in these mountains can turn dangerous quickly." They rode faster, Becky clinging to the saddle horn as Ranger navigated the increasingly rough terrain. The first fat raindrops began to fall as a modest homestead came into view, a sturdy cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a barn, and several outbuildings surrounded by a split-rail fence. A woman appeared on the porch as they approached, rifle in hand. She lowered it when Preston called out a greeting. "Preston O'Malley, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed, setting the rifle aside. "What brings you to our neck of the woods?" "Need shelter from the storm, Martha," Preston replied, helping Becky dismount. "This is Becky. Becky, meet Martha Miller, finest cook in 3 territories." Martha was a robust woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. She took in Becky's borrowed men's clothing and their travel-worn appearance with raised eyebrows but said only, "Well, come in before you're soaked through. John's out checking the livestock, but he'll be back soon." The cabin was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of stew simmering on the stove. Martha bustled about, setting out towels for them to dry off and pouring hot coffee. "So," she said when they were settled at the kitchen table, "am I to understand this is your wife, Preston?" Becky choked on her coffee. "News travels fast," Preston said wryly. "Ryder came through yesterday, talking about a cowboy who interrupted a wedding in Copper Creek, claiming the bride was already his wife." Martha's shrewd eyes moved between them. "Caused quite a stir from what I heard." "It's not what you think," Becky began. Martha held up a hand. "I don't need explanations. Preston wouldn't be involved unless there was good reason." She stood, heading to a chest in the corner. "Let's find you something more suitable to wear, dear. You're swimming in those clothes." While Becky changed into a borrowed dress in the Miller's spare room, she could hear the murmur of voices from the kitchen. Martha's tone was questioning, Preston's replies too low to make out. When she returned, they fell silent, exchanging a look she couldn't interpret. John Miller arrived shortly after, a bear of a man with a booming voice and a hearty handshake. He welcomed them without question, and soon they were seated around the table enjoying Martha's venison stew. "How long have you two been married?" John asked, passing a basket of biscuits. Becky tensed, but Preston answered smoothly, "Not long enough for me to know better than to drag my wife through a thunderstorm." The Millers laughed, and the conversation shifted to safer topics: the weather, the condition of the trails, news from nearby settlements. Becky found herself relaxing, drawn into the warm atmosphere of the Miller home. After dinner, John insisted that Preston help him check on a troublesome fence while Martha enlisted Becky's assistance with the dishes. "He's a good man," Martha said when they were alone, nodding toward the door the men had exited through. "One of the best I know." "We're not really married," Becky admitted, unable to maintain the charade with this kind woman, Martha's hands stilled in the dishwater. "I figured as much." She studied Becky's face. "Preston told us enough, said you needed help getting away from a bad situation. He saved me from marrying a man old enough to be my father," Becky said. "A man who saw me as property to be purchased." Martha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I was 16 when my father tried to marry me off to a man who had 3 wives die under suspicious circumstances. I ran away the night before the wedding. What happened? I stumbled across John's family's farm. They took me in, gave me work." A smile softened Martha's weathered face. "John and I fell in love properly, married when I was 18, been together 35 years now." "That's beautiful," Becky said sincerely. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns." Martha squeezed Becky's hand. "Sometimes for the better, if we're brave enough to follow the path that opens before us." That night, Martha insisted that Preston take the spare room while Becky shared their daughter's old room. "Sarah's married and living in Oregon now," she explained. "But I keep her room ready for when she visits with our grandchildren." As Becky settled into the narrow bed, she found herself thinking about Preston. He remained a mystery capable of forging documents and comfortable claiming a stranger as his wife, yet trusted implicitly by the Millers, who seemed like thoroughly decent people. What kind of man was he, really? Her sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of Albert Holloway's grasping hands and her stepfather's angry face. She woke with a start in the darkest hours of the night, heart racing. Unable to fall back asleep, she wrapped a borrowed shawl around her shoulders and padded quietly to the kitchen for a drink of water. A figure sat at the table, illuminated by a single candle. Preston looked up as she entered, surprise evident on his face. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. Becky shook her head, pouring herself water from the pitcher on the counter. "Bad dreams. About what happened yesterday, yes." She hesitated, then sat across from him. "It doesn't feel real yet that I actually escaped." Preston pushed a folded piece of paper across the table. "I was working on this. It might help make it feel more real." Becky unfolded it to find an official-looking document declaring the marriage of Albert Holloway and Rebecca Jane null, and void on the grounds that she was previously married to Preston O'Malley. "It's not legal," Preston explained, "but it looks convincing enough that if Albert or your stepfather come looking, it might give them pause." "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd first called her his wife in front of the entire town. Preston was silent for a long moment, the candlelight casting shadows across his face. "My sister," he finally said, his voice low. "She was 17 when our father arranged her marriage to a business associate, a man with a reputation for cruelty toward women." His hands clenched on the table. "I was away, working cattle in Wyoming. By the time I returned, the wedding had taken place. 6 months later, my sister was dead." "Oh, Preston," Becky breathed, instinctively reaching for his hand. Her husband claimed she fell down the stairs, but the bruises... He swallowed hard. "I should have been there to protect her. It wasn't your fault." His eyes, when they met hers, were haunted. "Maybe not. But I made a promise at her grave that I'd never stand by and watch another woman forced into marriage if I could prevent it." Becky squeezed his hand, understanding now what drove him. "What happened to her husband?" A dangerous edge crept into Preston's voice. "He had an unfortunate accident while cleaning his revolver. At least, that's what the sheriff determined." The implication was clear. Becky should have been frightened by this revelation, but instead she felt an odd sense of justice. And after that, I drifted. Worked ranches, drove cattle, took odd jobs, found that I had a knack for helping people out of difficult situations. A rueful smile touched his lips. The miller's son was falsely accused of rustling a few years back. I helped clear his name. That's why they trust you, Preston nodded. They're good people. They'll help you get settled in Silver Creek if that's what you want. And what about you? Becky asked, suddenly anxious about the answer. Where will you go? Wherever I'm needed, he said simply. That's what I do. The thought of Preston riding away, continuing his solitary existence, left Becky with an unexpected hollowness in her chest. She hardly knew this man, yet in the span of a day, he had become important to her. We should try to get some sleep, Preston said, standing. We have another long day of riding tomorrow. Becky nodded, reluctantly releasing his hand. As she returned to her borrowed bed, she realized that for the first time since her mother's death, she didn't feel alone. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. The Millers insisted they stay for breakfast, Martha packing provisions for their journey while John gave Preston information about trail conditions ahead. You're welcome to stay longer, Martha told Becky as they washed the breakfast dishes. No need to rush off if you're not ready. Thank you, but I think it's best we keep moving, Becky replied, surprised at how naturally the word "we" had come to her lips. Preston says people in Silver Creek might be able to help me find work. Martha studied her face. You know, John and I could use help around here. We're not as young as we used to be, and with our children gone. She left the offer hanging in the air. The kindness overwhelmed Becky. That's generous of you, but I wouldn't want to bring trouble to your door. My stepfather and Albert Holloway won't give up easily. We can handle the likes of them, Martha said confidently. Just something to consider. As they prepared to leave, John pulled Preston aside for a private conversation while Martha pressed a bundle into Becky's hands. A few things you might need, she explained. A dress, some undergarments, basic toiletries, and this. She tucked a small leather pouch into Becky's pocket. A little money, not much, but enough to give you options. I can't accept, Becky began. You can and you will, Martha interrupted firmly. Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. Pay me back when you're settled. Tears stung Becky's eyes as she hugged the older woman. Thank you. They departed with promises to send word when they reached Silver Creek. Preston seemed quieter than usual as they rode away from the Miller homestead, lost in thoughts he didn't share. The day was pleasantly warm, the mountain air fresh after the storm. They followed a narrow trail that wound through pine forests and across meadows brilliant with wildflowers. In different circumstances, it might have been a pleasant excursion. What did John want to talk to you about? Becky asked after they'd been riding for an hour. Preston adjusted his hat. He offered me work, said his new herd of cattle needs breaking in and he's short-handed. Are you going to take it? Told him I'd think about it. He glanced at her. Martha offered you a place too, didn't she? Becky nodded. She did. It would be a good situation for you. The Millers are decent folks and their place is remote enough that you'd be safe there. Is that what you think I should do? Preston was quiet for a moment. I think you should do whatever gives you the freedom you want. That's the whole point of what we did, giving you choices. The idea of staying with the Millers was appealing. But it would mean saying goodbye to Preston, and that prospect left her with an ache she wasn't ready to examine. What about you? She asked. What do you want? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Been a long time since anyone asked me that, he admitted. I'm not sure I know any more. They stopped to rest Ranger near a stream around midday. Becky unpacked the food Martha had provided: bread, cheese, and dried apple slices while Preston filled their canteens. Can I ask you something? She said as they ate. Seems fair, considering I know most of your life story already. Why don't you settle somewhere? Find a place of your own instead of drifting? Preston chewed thoughtfully before answering. Used to think I would someday. Had plans to start a horse ranch in Colorado before my sister died. He shrugged. After that, it didn't seem important anymore. And now? Now I'm not sure a drifter like me is cut out for putting down roots. He looked at her with unexpected intensity. What about you? What kind of life did you imagine for yourself before everything changed? The question startled her. No one had ever asked about her dreams before. "I wanted to teach," she admitted. "I love books, learning. My father encouraged it, but after he died." She trailed off. "My stepfather said education was wasted on girls." "He was wrong," Preston said firmly. "Silver Creek has a school, small but growing. They might need a teacher." The thought kindled excitement in Becky's chest. "Do you really think so?" "Worth asking," Preston said, smiling at her enthusiasm. "The schoolmarm when I was last there was talking about retiring." As they continued their journey, Becky found herself imagining a life in Silver Creek, a small house of her own, children eager to learn, independence she'd never had before. And unbidden, Preston was part of those imaginings, a presence in her life beyond their current circumstances. They made good progress through the afternoon, but as evening approached, the sky darkened again with threatening clouds. "There's an old line shack about a mile ahead," Preston said, eyeing the sky with concern. "We can shelter there for the night." The shack proved to be little more than 4 walls and a roof, a single room with a small fireplace, a rickety table, and a narrow cot. It was dusty but sound, the roof intact enough to keep out the rain that began to fall as they arrived. Preston tended to Ranger while Becky swept the worst of the dust from the floor and built a fire. By the time Preston joined her inside, rain was falling steadily, drumming on the roof. "Looks like we made it just in time," he said, shaking water from his hat. "Should blow over by morning." The confines of the shack felt much smaller with both of them inside. Becky was acutely aware of Preston's presence as they prepared a simple meal from their provisions. They ate in companionable silence, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. "You take the cot," Preston said when they'd finished eating. "I'll sleep by the fire." "The cot's barely big enough for one person," Becky pointed out, "and the floor is hard. We could share it." Preston looked at her sharply. "That wouldn't be proper." "We're supposedly married," she reminded him with a small smile. "And I trust you, Preston," his expression softened. "I appreciate that, but your reputation is already in tatters," she finished for him. "Besides, who's to know out here?" After a moment's hesitation, Preston nodded. "All right, but I'll stay on top of the blankets." The arrangement was awkward at first. The cot was indeed narrow, forcing them to lie close together, Becky under the blanket Martha had provided, Preston above it. But as the rain continued to fall and the fire burned low, the strangeness faded, replaced by a surprising comfort in each other's presence. "Preston," Becky whispered in the darkness. "What happens when we reach Silver Creek?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might have fallen asleep. "Finally," he said, "you'll start your new life. Find work, maybe as a teacher like you wanted. Make friends, build something for yourself." "And you'll leave," she said, unable to keep the sadness from her voice. Preston's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm against her skin. "Is that what you want?" "No," she admitted, the word barely audible above the rain. His breathing changed, becoming more measured. "What do you want, Becky?" She turned onto her side to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light. "I want to know if there could be something between us, something real, not just a story we're telling others." Preston's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," she said with conviction. "I know you're kind and brave. I know you help people who need it, even at risk to yourself. I know you make me feel safe and respected." "I'm not the settling kind," he warned, but his voice had softened. "Maybe you just haven't had a reason to settle before." His free hand came up to touch her cheek, tentative and gentle. "You deserve better than a drifter with a questionable past." "I deserve to choose for myself," Becky countered. "Isn't that what this was all about? Giving me the freedom to make my own choices." In the darkness, she felt rather than saw him smile. "You're using my own argument against me." "Is it working?" Instead of answering, Preston leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, almost reverent, but it sent warmth spreading through Becky's entire body. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "I can't promise you anything," he said softly. "But I can promise to be honest. Whatever happens between us, it will be real." Becky's heart raced with possibilities. "That's all I'm asking for." They fell asleep with hands still intertwined, the sound of rain creating a private world around them. Morning brought clearing skies and a new awareness between them. Becky found herself blushing under Preston's gaze as they prepared for the day's journey. Something had shifted during the night, a tentative understanding taking root. "We should reach Silver Creek by mid-afternoon," Preston said as they rode out. "The trail's easier from here." Becky nodded, trying to sort through her conflicting emotions. The prospects awaiting her in Silver Creek excited her, but the uncertainty of her relationship with Preston created an undercurrent of anxiety. What if he decided to leave after all? They rode side by side where the trail permitted, talking more freely than before. Preston told her about his childhood on a small ranch in Colorado, about his father's descent into bitterness after his mother died, about the years he'd spent working across the territories. Becky shared memories of her parents, her love of books, the dreams she'd set aside during the difficult years with her stepfather. "You know," Preston said as they crossed a wide meadow, "I've been thinking about what you said last night." Becky's heart skipped. "And maybe it's time I stopped drifting." His eyes held hers. "I've saved some money over the years, enough to buy a small place, start breeding horses like I planned before." "In Silver Creek?" she asked, hope rising in her chest. "Could be," he said with a smile that made her pulse quicken. "Here they have a promising new schoolteacher coming to town." Becky laughed, the sound bright in the mountain air. "Is that so?" Word is she's smart, brave, and prettier than a spring sunrise. Heat rose to Becky's cheeks at the compliment. "Sounds like you might be sweet on this schoolteacher." "Might be," Preston admitted, his expression growing serious. "But she deserves to be courted properly. No rushed decisions because of unusual circumstances." Becky appreciated his consideration but couldn't help feeling impatient, and if the schoolteacher doesn't want to wait. Preston's eyes darkened. Then she'd better be very sure about what she wants. "She is," Becky said softly, their gazes held, the connection between them almost tangible. Preston opened his mouth to respond when a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt just ahead of Ranger's hooves. The horse reared in alarm, and Preston's arm wrapped around Becky's waist, keeping her from falling. "Get down," he ordered, guiding Ranger behind a large boulder for cover. 3 riders emerged from the trees at the edge of the meadow, rifles raised. Becky's blood ran cold as she recognized Albert Holloway in the lead, flanked by her stepfather and a man she didn't know. "Thought you could steal my bride," Albert called out, his voice carrying across the open space. "Hand her over, Cowboy, and we might let you live." Preston helped Becky dismount, keeping his body between her and the approaching men. "Stay behind me," he murmured, drawing his revolver. "If anything happens, take Ranger and ride for Silver Creek. Follow the trail east." "I won't leave you," she protested. "You might have to." His expression was grim. "Promise me." Before she could answer, Albert called out again. "Don't be foolish, O'Malley. There are 3 of us and one of you. The girl belongs to me, paid good money for her." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Preston shouted back. "And that good money you paid was for gambling debts, not a human being." Albert's face contorted with rage. "Last chance. Send her out now." "Never," Preston replied, his voice steady. Albert raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a shot rang out from behind them. A man's voice called, "That's far enough." Becky turned to see John Miller and 2 other men emerging from the trees to their right, rifles aimed at Albert and his companions. "You're outnumbered now, Holloway," John said, his normally friendly face hard as stone. "Lower your weapons." Albert hesitated, clearly calculating his options. "This isn't your concern, Miller. When armed men threaten travelers on my land, it becomes my concern," John replied. "Now drop those rifles before my trigger finger gets itchy." With obvious reluctance, Albert and his companions lowered their weapons. "This isn't over," Albert spat, glaring at Preston. "The girl was promised to me. The girl has a name," Becky said, stepping out from behind the boulder despite Preston's attempt to stop her. "And I was never yours to claim, Mr. Holloway. I'm a person, not property." "You ungrateful little," her stepfather began, but John cut him off. "That's enough," he said sharply. "Here's what's going to happen. You 3 are going to turn around and ride back the way you came. If I ever see you on my land again, or if I hear you've caused trouble for these folks, you'll answer to me and every other decent rancher in the territory." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. After a tense moment, Albert jerked his head at his companions and they retreated, throwing venomous looks over their shoulders. When they were out of sight, John approached, clapping Preston on the shoulder. "Thought you might need some backup." "Martha had a feeling those men might come looking for you." "How did you find us?" Becky asked, her legs still shaky from the confrontation. "Followed your trail," one of John's companions explained. "Wasn't hard after the rain, you two left clear tracks." "We're grateful," Preston said sincerely. "That could have ended badly," John nodded. "They might try again. Why don't you come back to our place? Stay until things cool down." Preston looked at Becky, the question in his eyes. She shook her head. "We need to keep going forward, not back." "She's right," Preston told John. "But we appreciate the offer." "At least let us escort you to Silver Creek," John suggested. "Safety in numbers." This time, Preston didn't hesitate to accept. The rest of the journey passed without incident, the larger group deterring any further attempts by Albert to reclaim his property. They reached Silver Creek by late afternoon, the small but thriving town bustling with activity. Unlike Copper Creek, Silver Creek showed signs of prosperity: a proper hotel, several stores, a schoolhouse, and even a small bank. People nodded greetings as they rode down the main street, curious about the newcomers but not openly hostile. "I know the sheriff here," John told them as they dismounted in front of the hotel. "Good man. I'll explain the situation, make sure he knows to keep an eye out for Holloway and his friends." "Thank you, John," Becky said warmly. "For everything," the older man smiled. "Martha would have my hide if I didn't make sure you two were settled safely." He lowered his voice. "That offer of work still stands for both of you, whenever you're ready." After John and his men departed, Preston secured them rooms at the hotel's separate rooms. Becky noted with a mix of disappointment and appreciation for his propriety. The hotel owner's wife, Mrs. Bennett, took an immediate liking to Becky, offering to show her around town the next day. "I hear the school board is desperate for a teacher," she confided as she showed Becky to her room. "The last one left to get married 2 months ago, and they've been making do with volunteers since." Becky's pulse quickened with excitement. "Do you know who I should speak with about the position?" "My husband's on the board," Mrs. Bennett said with a smile. "I'll arrange a meeting for tomorrow." That evening, Preston and Becky dined together in the hotel's small restaurant. It felt strange to be in civilization again after their days on the trail, strange but pleasant to sit across from Preston at a proper table, with clean clothes, purchased hastily from the general store, and the prospect of a comfortable bed. "So," Preston said after they'd ordered, "it seems Silver Creek might need a teacher after all." Becky couldn't contain her smile. "Mrs. Bennett is arranging a meeting with the school board tomorrow." "I'm happy for you," Preston said, and she could see he meant it. "You'll make a wonderful teacher." "What about you?" she asked, the question that had been hovering between them since their conversation that morning. "Will you stay in Silver Creek?" Preston's eyes held hers. "I've been thinking about what you said, about putting down roots." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I talked to the livery owner while you were shopping. He mentioned a small property for sale just outside town, 10 acres, a modest house, good water access." Becky's heart raced. "For horses, it has potential," he acknowledged. "Needs work, but it could be a start." "You're really considering staying," she said, hardly daring to believe it. "I'm considering a lot of things," Preston said softly, "including the fact that I can't imagine riding away from you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Becky squeezed his hand. "Then don't. It won't be easy," he warned. "I'm not wealthy. Building a horse breeding operation takes time and money, and there's still the matter of Albert Holloway. He might not give up so easily." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Becky said, "and as for Albert, we'll face that together if we have to." Preston studied her face, as if memorizing every feature. "You know, when I claimed you as my wife in Copper Creek, it was just words, a story to get you out of a bad situation. And now," she prompted when he paused, "now I'm starting to think I'd like to make it real, someday." His voice was low, intimate. "When you're ready, if you'll have me." Becky's breath caught. "Are you proposing, Preston O'Malley?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Not officially, not yet. Like I said, you deserve to be courted properly." "And if I don't want to wait?" she challenged, emboldened by the affection in his eyes. Then I'd say you're as impulsive as I am, he replied, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. But some things are worth doing right. Becky wanted to argue, to tell him that what they'd already shared, the danger, the trust, the growing affection, was more meaningful than any conventional courtship. But she understood his desire to honor her with tradition, to give her the choice she'd been denied before. All right, she conceded. Court me then, but don't take too long about it. Preston's laugh drew glances from other diners. Yes, madam. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Becky met with the school board and, impressed by her knowledge and enthusiasm, they offered her the teaching position on the spot. The salary was modest, but included a small cottage behind the schoolhouse where the teacher traditionally lived. Meanwhile, Preston rode out to examine the property the livery owner had mentioned. He returned mid-afternoon, a new energy in his step. It's perfect, he told Becky as they walked along Silver Creek's Main Street. Needs repairs, but the land is good. Previous owner started building corrals for horses before his wife took ill and they moved east. You're going to buy it, she asked, hope rising in her chest. Already did, Preston admitted. Put down a deposit this morning. Becky stopped walking, turning to face him. You're staying, really staying. His smile was answer enough, but he added, turns out I have a reason to put down roots after all. Their courtship unfolded over the following weeks as spring yielded to summer. True to his word, Preston did things properly, calling on Becky at her cottage with flowers, taking her on buggy rides through the countryside, joining her for church on Sundays. The townspeople, initially curious about the newcomers, soon accepted them as part of the community. Becky threw herself into preparing for the school year, organizing books and planning lessons. Preston worked from dawn until dusk on his new property, repairing fences, fixing the roof, and building additional corrals. In the evenings, exhausted but satisfied, they often sat on Becky's small porch, talking about their days and their hopes for the future. Word came from John Miller that Albert Holloway had been arrested for assault after a barroom brawl in Helena. He would be occupied with his legal troubles for some time, easing their concerns about his threats. On a warm July evening, exactly 2 months after they'd first met at that fateful wedding in Copper Creek, Preston arrived at Becky's cottage with his hair slicked back and wearing a new shirt. I thought we might ride out to the property, he suggested. I've finished something I want to show you. Intrigued, Becky agreed. The ride was pleasant, the evening air still warm but touched with a cooling breeze. As they approached Preston's land, Becky gasped in surprise. The transformation was remarkable. The once dilapidated house now stood proudly with a fresh coat of paint and new shutters. Flowers bloomed in boxes beneath the windows, and a wide porch wrapped around the front, complete with a swing. The corrals gleamed with new wood, and in one of them, 3 beautiful horses grazed contentedly. Preston, she breathed, it's wonderful. His eyes shone with pride as he helped her down from her horse. Come inside. The interior was simply but comfortably furnished with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and bookshelves built into one wall. I know it's not much, Preston said, suddenly seeming nervous, but I thought. It's perfect, Becky assured him, turning slowly to take it all in. Preston took her hands in his. There's something else I wanted to show you. He led her to a small room off the main living area. Inside was a desk positioned beneath a window with a view of the mountains and more bookshelves, these filled with volumes she recognized, teaching materials, classic literature, poetry collections. I thought you might need a place to prepare your lessons, Preston explained. Somewhere quiet with good light. Tears pricked at Becky's eyes. No one had ever been so thoughtful, so attentive to her needs and dreams. Do you like it? He asked when she remained silent. I love it, she managed, her voice thick with emotion, but I don't understand. My cottage is in town, near the school. Preston took a deep breath. I was hoping you might consider living here instead. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. With me, as my wife. Becky's heart seemed to stop as Preston knelt before her, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. Rebecca Jane, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. 2 months ago, I called you my wife to save you from a marriage you didn't want. Now I'm asking you to be my wife because I can't imagine my life without you. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Joy bubbled up inside Becky, spilling over in laughter and tears. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston O'Malley." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face in his hands. "I've been waiting to do this properly," he murmured before kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I was thinking we could get married before school starts. Give us time for a short honeymoon before your teaching duties begin." "That sounds perfect," Becky agreed. "A real wedding this time, not one where I'm being forced, but one where I'm choosing the man I love." Preston's arms tightened around her. "I promise you'll never regret that choice." 3 weeks later, on a perfect August day, Becky stood once again before a minister. But this time, her wedding dress was one she had chosen herself, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk. This time, the man waiting for her was one she loved with all her heart. And this time, the words "I do" came easily, joyfully from her lips. The small church in Silver Creek was filled with their new friends and neighbors. John and Martha Miller had made the journey to attend, bringing a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. Even Becky's childhood friend, Sarah, whom she'd managed to contact, had traveled from Denver for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Becky reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, how a forced wedding had led to this moment of genuine commitment and love. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Preston's kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. The cheers of their friends surrounded them as they turned to face their future hand in hand. That evening, as they danced under the stars at their wedding celebration, Preston pulled Becky close and whispered, "Happy, Mrs. O'Malley." "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "And to think, it all started with you claiming me as your wife in front of the whole town." Preston's laugh rumbled against her cheek. "Best lie I ever told, and now it's the truth," Becky said, lifting her face for his kiss. "Now and forever." 5 years later, Becky stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Preston teach their 3-year-old son, Michael, to sit on a gentle pony. Their 1-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, gurgled happily in her arms, reaching out chubby hands toward her father and brother. Preston's horse breeding business had flourished, his reputation for quality stock spreading throughout the territory. Becky still taught at the school, though she'd taken a year off after each child's birth. They had built a good life together, not without challenges, but filled with love and mutual respect. "Look, Mama," Michael called out, his face alight with excitement as Preston led the pony in a small circle. "I'm riding. I see you, sweetheart." Becky called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. "You're doing wonderfully." Preston looked up, catching her eye with a smile that still made her pulse quicken after all these years. In that moment, with the mountain sun warm on her face and her family before her, Becky marveled at how completely her life had changed from that terrible day in Copper Creek. A forced wedding had been transformed into a love story. A desperate escape had become a journey home. And a stranger who had called her, his wife, had become the center of her world, the father of her children, the partner in all her dreams. As Preston finished the riding lesson and carried a giggling Michael toward the house, Becky thanked whatever twist of fate had brought them together. Some might call it chance or luck, but Becky preferred to think of it as destiny, the universe conspiring to bring two souls together who were meant to find each other all along. Preston climbed the porch steps, setting Michael down to run inside for a promised cookie, and wrapped his free arm around Becky and their daughter. "What are you thinking about, looking so thoughtful?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Becky leaned into his embrace, savoring the solidity of him beside her. "Just counting my blessings." "And how many is that?" he teased. She smiled up at him, her heart as full as it had ever been. "Too many to count, my love, too many to count."